Welcome to the Small Giants Fishbowl. This topic is heroes, lovers, rebels, and brands? Small giants struggle against a public perception of not only what success is, but even how they should be running their businesses. For the company working to make a difference in every life it touches, understanding your archetype and what kind of brand your company is destined to have can put you in a powerful position to affect change in a manner that fits you and your people best. Facilitated by Sunny Bunnell and Ashley Hansberger, co-founders of Motto. Okay, here we go.
We have a branding firm called Motto. We're based in South Carolina, and we work with companies to strengthen their positioning and their branding, taking them through this discovery process and this journey to really get to the heart of the company and to be able to bring that to life through their brand. So that's kind of our sweet spot. We work on a lot of different deliverables, so to speak, brand strategy, naming, brand identity, design, of course, and into web development as well. But our kind of our core thing about what we do is very much a strategy level, building your brand from a place of purpose, building your brand, harnessing the power of your values, and so on and so forth. And then again, bringing that to life through the experience that you deliver to your customers, to your clients, to your audience at large. That's kind of a recap. So let's just get to know everybody really quickly. Marissa, we know you, but for the sake of introducing yourself to the other people in the chat, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Marissa. I am in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I own a company called The Whole Brain Group, and we are a web design and internet marketing agency. We do a little bit of branding and logo design stuff, but not quite in the same depth, I guess I would say. We've never set up shop in one of our clients' locations to get their positioning and branding right. So I'm thinking that's a good idea, though. That's me. Yeah.
Next, let's do Chris. I see your face, so we'll go.
Okay. I'm Chris. I'm with a company called Ingenious. We're a web design and marketing firm, also based in South Carolina. We're up in Greenville. Working mostly with small businesses. We've got a big passion for small businesses as well as nonprofits, and we've been doing this for about 7 years now.
Cool.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, fellow South Carolinian. Let's go with Amy.
Okay. We run a retirement consulting firm in Michigan, and we handle retirement plans for small and large companies. From the compliance aspect to the tax return and design work for employers.
Sounds good. Well, let's get into it. As you know from the summary of this call, we wanted to come here and talk to you today about this concept of brand archetypes and how understanding and embracing your brand's archetype helps you build a stronger and a more meaningful brand. It's this whole idea that goes back to why is Apple so loved, and why is Oprah the most powerful woman in the world, and why is Starbucks the place that you go to when you want a cup of coffee or you want to sit down and work. And it's because they all carry this character and this personality, this human-like approach that they connect with their audience. And so, for the purpose of this call, this is a big and deep conversation, and we certainly don't have the time here to cover everything to the depth of what this topic really consists of, because it is quite involved. But we wanted to expose you to the idea of archetypal theory, as we call it, and get you thinking about this, because it's an approach and a way that we start to work with our clients and develop their brands at Motto. To help them strategically position their brands with more meaning and more influence and more of that connection. So our clients tell us that identifying their brand's archetype is one of the most difficult yet rewarding experiences that helps them understand their brand on its deepest level. So the idea that you're really rising beyond what it is you make and what it is you sell, and you get to the level and you sort of transcend into this realm of who you are as a company and what you stand for and how it is you want to be perceived. And so that in our opinion, is the basis of the best branding strategies, whether you're B2B, sounds like most of you are, or you have a product company, B2C, really this idea that it's all really just human to human, and building brand archetypes into your brand is one of the most important things that you can do for it. So some of the things that we're going to cover on this call is Sunny's going to take you through a brief history of archetypes and what they are, where they come from, why they matter. That'll provide you guys with a context for this conversation. And then we're going to talk about the 12 primary archetypes and show you some examples of brands that use archetypes and how they develop their patterns and story forms to effectively tell their brand story. And then we're also going to kind of take you through the process of discovering your brand's archetype and what questions you would want to ask, and the process that you would want to go through in order to kind of to work through that for your own company and for your own brand. So go ahead. Is there any questions right now on that first half, or am I good to start? Good to go. We're good to go? All right. So a little bit of history about archetypes. So Carl Jung was the godfather of archetypes. He actually studied under Sigmund Freud, but later broke away from some of Freud's theories. He was probably one of the most revered contributors to the analysis of like symbols and dreams, and really the collective conscious. So he really pioneered this idea of archetypes early on, really around the 1950s. He identified some very reoccurring universal and archaic themes that are found in literature, art, mythology, and he really believed that all these sort of the most powerful ideas in history really go back to archetypes. So, you know, he, like I said, he pioneered that. And then there was a Dr. Carol Pearson who also sort of built on Jung's theories back in the 80s and is still continuing strong today. She's a world-renowned expert on psychology, transformational leadership, really the person behind archetypal systems, and really developed the 12 primary archetypes that we use today, and how they relate to business, branding, marketing, and now even with leadership. So brand archetyping really is a fundamental, and it's a crucial part of developing a brand strategy. And so just like people, brands have very distinct personalities. Strong brands have clear themes that run throughout them. And the foundation of that theme can be very hard to crystallize. And we find that primarily in our own business and with our clients' businesses, that they have a very difficult time identifying that one overarching theme and then building it into their brands and their companies through that archetype. So altogether, there's actually 12 archetypes, like I mentioned. They are the hero, the rebel, the sage, the explorer, the magician, the every person or the citizen, the jester, the lover, the ruler, the caregiver, the creator, and the innocent. It's a mouthful. It's a lot. It's a lot. But, you know, they're very well-known characters throughout history. You can find them again in books and stories and so forth. So think of each archetype as really kind of a fundamental and timeless universal theme or reference point. Just like the stars or the horizon or the sun or the moon, these sort of ideas and concepts, they don't really need any charts or diagrams. We know them as like a reference point. And so, you know, when we think of archetypes, there's countless brands that we can reference. Each of them have their own set of values, their meanings, motivations, personality traits, from which these images and themes sort of emerge. So I'll touch kind of briefly on a couple that you probably are familiar with, and then we'll kind of go a little bit further into some that you might not be familiar with. First is Harley Davidson. When you think of Harley Davidson, you might think of the word rebel. You might think of the word outlaw, Americana, free spirit, nonconformist. So these words, they paint a picture in our minds, and you're already sort of making this direct connection to the archetype that underpins that brand, which is the rebel. Other rebel brands are like Virgin, Apple, James Dean, Lady Gaga, Bob Marley. Again, it's very cross boundary. It doesn't have to be brand specific. It can be human. It can be characters and stories. It can be films. So the rebel archetype really is a catalyst for social change, revolution. They seek to overturn what doesn't work. Another archetype that you're probably very familiar with is Oprah Winfrey, or a character that you're familiar with. So her and her family of companies take on the archetype of the sage. The sage, that archetype seeks truth. They share wisdom. They're very curious about the world around them. They want to study, to think, to learn, and to share those ideas. So really, you have this sort of, Oprah is like, when she recommends a book, we all rush out to buy it. I mean, she's just become this huge figure for understanding and fulfilling this role to find answers and to sort of, to some of the world's largest questions. And in that archetype, she has been able to then push us to kind of be curious about the world around us. So the sage always seeks truth. Brands like CNN, brands like the Wall Street Journal are all sage archetypes. Another great brand that you're probably familiar with is Levi's. Levi's is the explorer. They boldly embrace self-discovery, adventure. When the crowd goes one way, the explorer goes the other. They exist to discover and explore uncharted territory. Brands like North Face, LL Bean, Patagonia, characters like Amelia Earhart, Indiana Jones. You can think of books like Jack Kerouac's On the Road. These are all very explorer type archetypes. So make no mistake, when we talk about these types of brands, even though they're big, big brands, it still is very fundamentally the same for small companies. The same rules apply, same ideas apply. And you have to realize that these brands, this isn't by chance. This is incredibly deliberate. These companies know their archetype. They work to define that archetype on a daily basis, and they meticulously shape their brands around these characters. And so, again, whether you're a product or service organization, archetypes should really be a very fundamental aspect of and baseline for your branding. It's not the only component, but it's a big component. And it's something that we really leverage to kind of help us with the decisions that we make for the companies that we work with.
It's kind of like that whole idea about, if you're like a hero brand, and talking about like, Nike, I think, and just having an audience having a very clear understanding about what that brand stands for and putting it in terms of those very human traits and characteristics, just makes it effortless instead of trying to guess what they are here to do and what they're all about and what their motto, so to speak, is.
And brands, it's interesting, like some of these big brands, they rival each other and they have very different archetypes. For example, like Pepsi and Coke. Coke has notoriously been the innocent archetype. Think of their campaigns, open happiness, the real thing, all very innocent type. They're genuine, feel good. This is all like a time when you remembered when things were good, or you think back to history and growing up and
childhood nostalgic.
Right. Nostalgia and things like that. And then you think of Pepsi, and Pepsi's actually the jester. They're sort of the clown. They always are poking and prodding Coke, and you can think of campaigns like, the Pepsi Challenge. They're always sort of trying to differentiate themselves through their archetypes. And it's very interesting, once you start to know what archetypes are, you'll begin to be able to see them not only in your own company, but in other companies that either you work with or, brands that you see on a day-to-day basis. You'll be walking through the grocery store and you're like, I knew Oil of Olay was always the magician. It's kind of scary because you start to really pick them out, as you become more educated about them. Another great lover brand is like Victoria's Secret. They play up the lover archetype, the story of sensuality, appreciation for the female form, desire, love. Those are all very lover type archetypes. There's a great story that I can tell you about, kind of even diving deeper on how an archetype can be realized through not only the name of the company, but actually packaging, website, print ads, and so forth, is a company called Ivory Soap. So we're all very familiar with Ivory. We've probably used it at some point or another. But the company folklore about that was that sort of Procter and Gamble, one of the founders, was sitting in church and he was thinking about how he was going to market this little white bar of soap that would eventually float. He heard the name Ivory from a psalm that the preacher was giving or reading, and he instinctively adopted that name because of its pureness and what it actually meant. And so that name became symbolic for purity, goodness, renewal. Ivory is associated with sort of washing your sins away. The ritual of daily cleansing became, a part of their foundational element. And it even further extended into their packaging. Their first packaging was white. It was all white with just black lettering. It eventually changed to blue, but the packaging has always remained white. They have blue lettering and things like that. But this idea of pureness, cleanliness, it's rampant through everything that they do, and also through all of their communications. Their language, the visuals that they use to support the brand is incredibly driven by that archetype. So really committing to your archetype, it forces you to make a choice about who your brand is, what your brand embodies, as opposed to sort of being caught in an endless trajectory of, meaningless debate, which is like, what are our attributes? What are adjectives that we use to describe our company? Once you know your archetype, that conversation becomes a lot easier to have because you know where you're going, you know how to lead your culture, you know how to lead your team, and you know what images, ideas, and visual references and verbal references that you'll use to carry on that archetype. So one sort of thing that we can talk about, obviously, is about finding your own archetype and what sort of exercises that we use at Motto to do that. Our exercises are pretty involved. That's just the cover of a pretty big booklet. But when we work with companies on finding their archetype, it's usually a very exhaustive approach.
And it's part of a larger positioning.
Yeah, it's part of a larger positioning strategy, but it's pretty intense. Like our clients struggle with it. They find it very difficult to articulate things that don't necessarily have language, that we have to put into language. So it's a pretty intense exercise. But one of the things that we do as part of the discovering your brand archetype is step one is we search for the brand soul. That might sound a little spiritual and kind of funny, but we really do believe that brands and companies have some type of soul. They have an essence. We can call it essence. We can call it a feeling. We call it soul. But it's really where you kind of become like a brand biographer, so to speak. So you whether you're a company that's been in business for many years, you may go back to the beginning and sort of try to understand some very fundamental questions, like why did you start the company? What was the culture like around what was the culture like when you started the company? How was it first positioned? What was maybe the most memorable ad or website or print material or communication language that you use, that you ever created for the company? How do your customers, how did they relate to the brand in the beginning? And then how do they relate to the brand now? How do you differentiate from your competition? And these seem like very basic questions, but they apply to whether you're an existing company or you're a new company. And they're very important to be able to answer those questions because they set the baseline for, again, discovering your archetype. There's a great example. I mentioned oil of Olay early on. This is an example that actually Carol Pearson refers to a good bit. But when you're sort of discovering the biography of a brand, Oil of Olay was developed in, I think, South Africa, maybe in the 40s. And the story about Oil of Olay has just been handed down for generations. I mean, it's a very proprietary, very ownable thing to them. It's just a part of who they are and their DNA. The original formula was actually developed as really a salve to treat the skin of British pilots who had suffered burns during World War II. And it was kind of like, they called it the secret weapon. It was like this magic serum that they just, it worked so well, and it was so powerful that it took on this like magician, this magical quality. Later on, it actually was adopted by women as sort of this beauty secret. It was marketed to them as a sort of, this their special secret. And today, if you see Oil of Olay ads, it is 100% the magician archetype. They have stayed true to that company folklore since the very beginning, and it's expressed through all of their materials and who they are and their communications. They have never deviated from that underlying archetype. And the people that have taken over Oil of Olay also recognized that that was a very important secret that they should not turn their backs on or not keep inherently part of the brand. So, again, understanding those questions, diving deep into who you guys are as a company, who your clients are as a company, and really trying to get to the heart of that is so integral to sort of the step one baseline for uncovering sort of the brand soul. Step two is we search for what we call the brand's substance or authenticity. This is where we do a little bit of an analysis to make sure that the archetype is actually authentic and true. A lot of times we have had clients come to us and, they have a product and the product is mediocre. Hands down, it's not a great product. And in their mind, they have convinced themselves this is an amazing product, or this is the most amazing service that anyone's ever going to have. And the reality is that it's not. And so, to get to the heart of that, you can't be an archetype that you're not. You can't be an explorer if you're a citizen. We have a company right now that has come to us with everything but what they are. They're like, but we're the ruler. Maybe we could be the magician, and you're like, no, you're not, and it's hard. It's hard to have that conversation because you realize that, they want to aspire to be that, but it's not what they are. It's not who they are at their core. And so, tapping into that and being true to that is very, very important. And so we have to kind of get to some truth about the product or service. So some questions that might lead to a deeper understanding of that, between maybe like what the relationship is between your customer and the brand would be, do your customers sort of perceive you as strictly functional, or is there an emotional attachment? Is the brand part of a high involvement or low involvement product category? Is the brand something that is used on a routine, or is it something that's just sort of here and there? Is it sometimes that people come to you for certain things, but not everything? What's the consumer or customer's level of attachment to the brand? Are you sending out mixed signals? Are you not positioned correctly? Is your branding scattered? These are all things that kind of get to the heart of the brand substance and can tell you a lot about whether or not the archetype is actually true and authentic. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we really dive deeply on. A great example of that, again, another large brand, Levi's. Levi's has been around for a very long time, but they have lost their archetype more than once. They've gone from being an outlaw to a hero, to an explorer, to a jester. But originally they started out as a explorer, and they deviated from that path. And you saw it over the years. They lost a lot of market share, a lot of interest, and they're now just kind of resurrecting because they went back to the explorer and they were like, okay, this is who we are. And they've stayed true to that. And now their customers are kind of coming around because their messages aren't so confusing. For a long time, they were very, very confusing, and their audience was very confused. Step three, finding a competitive advantage. What is your distinct point of view? What is your distinct offering beyond money, beyond being able to perform? What exactly is it that makes you differentiated? In today's market, brands are just any brand that is undifferentiated truly falls to a commodity status. And what happens when it falls to a commodity status? It typically defaults to pricing. Pricing will be the one thing that people cut or slash because they're trying to compete, and it's really because they haven't really well defined their archetype, or they're not staying true to that. So to begin to assess the archetype and how that provides a basis for your brand's uniqueness, you may ask questions like, what are my competitors' archetypes? Can you define them and clearly find a unique place for your archetype to fit in? Call 'em all is a great example of that. When we worked with Call 'em all, again, they're very relatable now. We're talking about very relatable companies that we've worked with. Call 'em all was in a very commodity-like marketplace where everybody, was basically delivering group or text calling, and messaging. They're not changing the world, at first glance, you don't think that it's kind of anything that's differentiated. Once we kind of drilled down and figured out what exactly it was that was unique about Call 'em all, what we learned was that they were making choices based on their values, while other automated calling and group text messaging companies were essentially taking anything and everything, like robocalling, or even where, they were blasting out messages to people who hadn't signed up, for example. Call 'em all took a different stance. And while that was, such an integral component, they didn't think it was anything that was a differentiating factor for them. They thought it wasn't anything that made them unique in the industry. But in fact, the fact that they didn't take on customers and people who had, lists that were not approved was a big deal. And so kind of getting to the heart of them as like a citizen brand, being like, everyone has an important message to say, but who they choose to deliver that message for was the differentiating factor for Call 'em all. And so, questions like we asked, what other archetypes were their competitors living out? Were they, are any of them clearly related to the archetype most suited to your brand? How well are your competitors sort of supporting and living out their archetype? At what level are the competitors expressing their archetype? Is there opportunities to move to a deeper, more relevant, differentiating archetype? Things like that. All of these questions are just, again, probes, pushes, different, kind of like 20 ways to ask the same question, really. But what you're trying to do is just get to the heart of what about that company is truly authentic and unique, and how can you position it to separate them in the market
And make it relevant.
To the customer. So step 4 is really kind of the there's a couple other steps, but really these are the main primary steps. Step 4 is really staying on course. Once you've developed that archetype, once you know what that archetype is, you developed your differentiating viewpoint in the market, then it's about staying on course and managing that identity. So once we've been through this sort of unique analytic process, companies tend to have, more confidence regarding their archetype. They feel like they're in the right shoes, they're walking in the right shoes. They feel comfortable. They feel like something has changed within their organization. And it's because they finally know who they are.
And they can tangibly say, like, we are the hero. We are the rebel. We are the lover. We are the sage. We are the whatever the archetype is. It provides such an easier way to communicate through a character than it would be to say, oh, we're, to not have those arching characters behind you. It's like, it makes the conversation so much more less tangible in a lot of ways.
And the other thing too is a lot of companies that we work with tend to go through the list, and what they'll do is they'll kind of narrow it down. We'll help them narrow it down, and they'll always struggle with the 3 archetype syndrome, which is they'll be like, well, we believe that we're a hero, but we're a little bit lover and we're a little bit sage, and you're like, and that's probably true, because motto has every bit of a rebel spirit. I mean, we have a little bit of that rebellious kind of, want to do things our way differently. We want to chart sort of our own, up against the grain, but truly we're an explorer brand. And we own that and believe that. And it's through all of our communications and who we are. And so what we really try to do is get our clients and the people that we work with to not focus on, trying to kind of mix and match archetypes, but really truly define one solid archetype and live that and breathe that and push that into all of their materials, all of the way that they communicate, because it makes the conversation so much easier,
Stronger
and
too.
stronger, and it doesn't dilute it. When you have 3 archetypes, you're kind of confused.
Well, you're compromising
Yeah.
the integrity of the identity, you know?
Right.
So that's the whole thing about in branding and in marketing, you know, this idea about being everything to everyone. And, you know, we all know that that can't happen, yet so many companies fail in that regard because, you know, they can't commit to who they are and what they
Or they're scared. They're
Yeah.
scared to commit to that because it feels very daunting. You know, if you're a lover, you're going to use language that's very, you know, it's going to be a lover type feeling. It's going to, you know, have sensuality. It's going to be poetic. Maybe it might even be, you know, a little racy at times. Like there's things about the lover brand that are very, you know, you have to commit to that. And same thing with the hero. Same thing with, you know, the sage or any of these, the magician. You have to commit to that wholeheartedly. And it can be very daunting for companies to do. But once they own it and they adopt it and they understand it and embrace it, it's really amazing the transformation that can happen within your companies and for those that you work with. And Column probably is, in our opinion, one of the greatest case studies that we've had of that transformation taking place. I mean, from where they were to where they are now is really remarkable. I mean, they were very lost, and they know that. You know, we've shared this in many case studies. We've talked about this. They were very lost. They were making money. They were very successful by accounts, but they were lost as they didn't know where, they didn't have a purpose. They didn't really know why they were making this sort of business. You know, what was this business really for? Why was it important? Why did it matter to the world? And by defining that and defining their archetype, defining their positioning, defining their messaging, and then pushing it out through their touch points, like, you know, their website, and that we rewrote their entire website, redesigned their entire website, redesigned their entire mobile app, redesigned their office. Everything became a part of that extension of that larger idea. And so that's what archetypes are all about. I mean, you know, it's a very powerful tool.
And we would, you know, each one of you for your companies certainly have an archetype.
Absolutely.
You know, it might not be totally clear. And again, there's a lot of things, you know, on the checklist of, well, what makes a hero brand, or what makes an explorer brand. You know, there's very certain values and qualities and characteristics behind each of those archetypes, that are make them who they are. And so, you know, what we would just love for you guys is to, you know, open the conversation and talk about perhaps if you have been able to identify the archetype for your own company, or how you see this fitting into the work that you do as a brand. And certainly questions that you have. We're here to help.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask around the room, per se, to what everybody's kind of gut reaction is to what they think their archetype, sorry, that's my Nebraska accent coming out, what their archetype is and why they have a gut feeling towards that. And I wanted to give Amy, who I'm unmuting right now, give Amy a chance to respond first. So Amy, what's your gut reaction?
My gut reaction is that we're an explorer. The industry that we're in is very regulated by the IRS. However, we're always searching for new and unique ways to set ourselves apart from our competitors, the way that we deliver things, the customer service that we give, and just really trying to push the boundaries a little bit with how that's done, even though we have, you know, specific IRS guidelines that we have to live within.
I'm not sure.
How can we help you figure it out?
Yeah.
It's too hard to do in 15 minutes, but you know, sometimes we can kind of identify some baselines to start with. You know, for example, Amy was mentioning that she's regulated by the IRS. So typically brands that fall in like banking, government, insurance, credit cards, things like that. You think of rulers. They're usually a ruler type brand. Any type of authority or authorization, king, queen. You think of those kind of archetypes. The ruler typically tends to be in that space a good bit.
Yeah. Well, as explorers are. You can think of them too in terms of like their subtypes, like the pioneers or the adventurers or the seekers. They're very much individuals, and they kind of have this whole goal about figuring out who you are and what you stand for through exploring the world, and so, those are brands like North Face and Pier 1 and Jeep and Kashi and, so it's we've got some worksheets that actually clearly like define like the description of what makes each archetype who they are, and so it's kind of hard at first glance to be able to associate, but some are more clear cut than others. Our clients very much struggle with this, and they usually, because there's so many dimensions to human personality. And the other thing too is sometimes it's very difficult because it might not be values based. It might be the product or the service. Sometimes, if the product tends to be, everything's white or shiny or bright, it could be, like an innocent brand, so there's, or like it might be Walgreens, and sort of be like a caretaker brand. So it depends, it depends. There's a lot of different aspects to these types of companies.
Marissa?
Oh, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. My instinct was maybe sage, just because of the whole brainiac thing that we, that we're always trying to, I guess, guide people through the marketing process and educate them. We're very much into training and education and, helping people do things themselves if they want to. And so that was my instinct.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not rebel.
Not a rebel.
Do you guys feel like you guys are that's another amazing point. It's like you can eliminate your archetypes right away. Say, oh, we're definitely not this, this, and this. And it's kind of a process of elimination times to go through this exercise, because right away, you can check off most of them, just the feeling that, that's definitely not us. But companies struggle between getting the one, because again, there's so many dimensions to personality and so many dimensions to really purpose and what you're here to do. And that's really where this all boils down to, again, is looking at the purpose. A caretaker's brand, a caretaker archetype is to take care of something, to someone through doing good and through helping them and serving them. So there's a lot of that too, that a lot of angles to look at when it comes to developing the archetype. But please, once you define it for your own company, how much you can see how to bring that to life through your language, through your communications, through the way that you express the company and what the experience that you deliver. And it makes that connection with your clients and with your audience so much stronger, because they can relate to you on a totally different level. They don't question what you're there to do. A hero, is there to protect and to serve and to act in a courageous way in order to save someone else, so, when you kind of think about all these, like, it's pretty interesting.
Sunny and Ashley, we've talked a lot about archetypes, but most of the references have kind of been business to consumer. Can you give us kind of some examples? We've got some design, digital marketing firms, benefits development that are inside that are all B2B. Is there a typical archetype that falls into the B2B realm, or do you find that they run the gamut?
Really run the gamut. I mean, again, I think I said in this
early on, you know, whether it's B2B or B2C, really, like, we're in the era now where the blinds between that are so blurry because of consumers' expectations, and consumers are so much more sophisticated now than they have ever been. And it's really about just being like human to human, you know, not just business to consumer or business to business. It's relating on a human level, which is what archetypes are all about. So no, I don't think that there's one or a couple of very popular archetypes for B2B brands, B2B businesses. It's really about what it is you're here to do, you know. I'd be curious for maybe Chris, you know, you seem to be having not really know what your archetype is or struggling with that conversation. I think it's helpful to like look at that in the reference and in the context of when you think about what you do and why you do it. You know, sometimes your archetype can be born in that alone.
Oh yeah.
You know, so
I think design companies especially struggle with this. Branding companies and designers
and marketing companies,
marketing companies, they are the worst, and they're the last to ask for help. Right. They feel like they should know the answers to this because they're in the business. And it's very interesting how many. I recently wrote this article for How about following purpose and really knowing your purpose beyond the work that you do for clients, because so much of our day-to-day lives is about helping other businesses grow through marketing or design or web design or whatever those things are. And we are the worst at marketing ourselves and having a brand or having a voice for ourselves, because we always think like, oh my God, if we look to one way or the other, our clients will see themselves in us and they'll be scared off, or they'll say, oh my God, they're going to make me look like them. And so they are probably, in my opinion, the companies that struggle the most.
And that's why you see so little differentiation.
Designers are terrible about this. Like if you go to 100 design firm websites, they'll be like, we drink Coke and we're so bright minded and we love code, and you're just like, and they don't know how to differentiate themselves, and they default to that because they don't have anything else to say. They're scared to say it. And so, we tend to see a lot of that, but it's normal. We struggle with it. We still struggle with it. Even after all these years, we've been doing this a long time. And even sometimes we have to remind ourselves what our archetype is and still stay true to that, because sometimes we want to deviate a little bit, but it's normal. It's completely normal. So Chris, what's going on? How would you say that you guys are struggling with that?
Well, I actually found a site that while we've been talking that kind of gives a little bit more imagery around each archetype and puts more words to it. And I was reading through that, kind of wondering what are we as y'all were talking about it. And I think we're kind of the creator. We're also kind of the magician and explorer. And I think, creator and explorer go well together.
There you go with those three.
Yeah.
And we would very much urge you to not take that and embrace three archetypes. Really, I think that you can find a huge transformation in the way that you think about yourselves and what you do, and are being able to communicate with that with your clients by narrowing it down on the one archetype that your company can embrace. And that's a matter of just having talks and discussions about it, and kind of your narrative through who it is at the end of the day that you want your company to be.
Yeah, but I'd also say to be very careful about doing these exercises on your own, and to work with somebody to help you through that process. Because sometimes, I heard this great piece of advice one time, that sometimes we look at the label from inside the jar. We can't see what the label on the outside of the jar says. And sometimes you need someone else to help you work through this exercise and be very objective, to kind of hear you, talk to your customers, and all of a sudden you get this picture to help whoever you're working with figure out what that archetype is. Because a lot of people could take a worksheet like this and go, hey, why? We're like, yeah, we're the nurturer, and everything is built around that. But it's not wise, because sometimes you're just not right. And it can affect the health of the company if you're not
Well, it's the idea that you shouldn't diagnose yourself from WebMD.
yeah.
Right. You might educate yourself on some very basic elements, and it might give you a start. But you really want to go to your doctor and somebody that has a deeper understanding of how everything looks.
Yeah, to know what the symptoms are, because most people, most companies are confused. We think that these big brands have it all figured out. The truth is they don't. They are just as confused as everyone else. And we've seen it and heard it and talked to them, and it's amazing. You think that from the outside in, you're like, wow, these guys are, it's like Coca-Cola has it like, they just mastered the art of this. And the truth is that they haven't. And
a lot of that I think is because we all have a tendency to want to go with the trend, to be important in the moment and to be relevant to what is going on in our culture at any given time or what hot topics are. And so you see a lot of companies shift positioning on a dime, which is fatal. And that can really damage a company's reputation and relationships. Because it's this idea, well, they don't know who they are. If they're switching on the dime all the time and their messaging and in the way that they're presenting their brand. You've seen that happen, and it's definitely a dangerous situation to be in.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too that you have to think about is like stories. Stories are really probably the most the way that you can live out some of these things. Like stories. I mean, let's face it, they've been passed down through generations. Everybody's gathered around the campfire. Everybody loves a great story. And the way that you sort of strike a deep nerve or you reveal these truths is by, telling these stories through your archetype. And whatever message that you send out, whatever your campaign is, whatever your website is, as long as it is true, and it's reflective of that larger archetype, then, you never have to worry that you're not being authentic or you're kind of misguided. It's when you deviate from that, and like Ashley said, you start to kind of do things very whimsical and you make quick decisions and you're not really thinking about how they align with your decisions as a company. It can be huge. And the other thing is it helps you with hiring. I mean, these archetypes are so important on so many levels. They're beyond just how you communicate from a branding standpoint. They're how you hire, how you fire, how you lead your company, how you see the vision for your company. These archetypes tell that story for you and lead you in a way that's pretty magnificent. I mean, we're just fascinated by them if you can't tell. I mean, I think they're so powerful.
It's a really powerful branding tool.
Like one of the most powerful branding tools I think we've ever used.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left here. And what I want to make a promise is that I'm going to get Chris, Marissa, and Amy all together when we're at the summit. And we're going to chat a little bit about archetypes. So they can't escape me. Okay. It's a very small room, and it's an even smaller boat. So real quick, can you give us just a couple of resources, again, not necessarily WebMD, but just a couple of resources that people can look to in order to do some basic study before they go to their doctor and really learn what's going on.
Yeah, so the best book that you guys could read is by Carol Pearson. And it's called The Hero and the Outlaw, How to Build an Extraordinary Brand Using the Power of Archetypes, I believe is the title of it. But this was written and published, I think,
early 2000 maybe.
Yeah, a long time ago. I believe actually in the 90s. So it's just it's not a new book, and by no means is this a new topic or conversation. But it's one that just stands the test of time, and it's one that is so influential in branding. That's, in our opinion, that would be the best source of
it's like the Bible of archetypes
knowledge that you can get. Yeah. She's a true expert in it, and it just it puts everything into such a great perspective for helping understand what archetypes are and how they relate to branding and marketing.
And we have a booklet too. I mean, we have a sort of a kit that we have, and if you guys want to email us, we're happy to share that with you guys. And really, if you guys have any questions, or you want to even set up, a time for us to work with you guys on this particular exercise, we'd be happy to do that. And really, this is something we love doing. I mean, we love solving these problems for people because it's we just like to see the aha moment,
Right.
It's powerful. It's powerful to see that transformation, like I said.
Okay, well that's it for this one. Check out more Fishbowls exclusively for the Small Giants community at smallgiants.org.